That's just scratching the surface of hermeneutics, because at this point, we're still only talking about the interpretability of LLM outputs as a human reading LLM outputs, right? But hermeneutics goes so much wider than that, right? Because it also talks about how the meaning of words, and this is not just hermeneutics, but Wittgenstein too, right? And a lot of the philosophers at the time, how the meaning of words shifts, right? So in my previous video, I talked about linguistic attractors, and I gave the example of Pokemon. The meaning of Pokemon, well, we all have a kind of, Pokemon is a great example. Let me strip it back. Pokemon is a great example because it's so embedded into, I think, everybody in my generation, the generation above and the generation below. And we all have a relatively common understanding of what Pokemon is, because it was on a Game Boy, mass media, right? Pop culture. So there's a shared meaning there. So that's why when I use the Pokemon linguistic attractors analogy, and it's probably happening to you now, you might be thinking of Pikachu, Ash Ketchum, Japan, Game Boy. So there's a shared field that Gadamer talks about, right? That when you say a word, there's like an unspoken circle around it. And that's what makes the word have meaning, right? So the tricky part is that there's this shared field when I talk about Pokemon. But then there's also the fact that that shared field, while we share some parts, then it's a good example. The meaning shifts from person to person, right? So maybe to somebody who played Pokemon with their grandpa, weird example, right? Pokemon might be a memory of their grandpa, right? So that the meaning of Pokemon then is different from the meaning of Pokemon to me, right? Because Pokemon doesn't just talk about Pikachu and Ash Ketchum, but it talks about grandpa. If we talk about, I mean, this has happened to me in my own life, right? Of course, I like to talk about these things. I like to talk about God back in the day, right? And not even in a religious undertone, but just the notion of God, right? And you could have hour-long discussion about God with somebody, and you know how great God is, or this or that, or a debate of what God is, and then by the end of it, you realize, oh wow, you know, we've agreed on like 30% of 50% of what we said. But then we get to the end and we realize that like your definition of God, my definition of God, totally different things. So what did we even agree on, right? So there's so much room for resynthesizing meaning, for misrepresenting, for hedging on meaning, right? And that's where it gets even more complex, because up until now, like I was saying, we're talking about how humans interpret LLMs, but think of like how LLMs interpret humans, or how LLMs interpret LLMs, right? In agentic workflows and orchestration, right? That meaning also shifts, right? So maybe you have for instance, a workflow, right? Where you're using with one agent a word, and you have a different agent in the same orchestration, and you're using the same word, but you have different, you know, linguistic structure and environment. So the meaning of those two is inherently different, right?